How invested should you be in politics, and what can politicians really do to save a nation? It's an election year in the USA, and it's a big one, so here are some principles to help guide us. G'day, I'm Martyn Iles, and this is Living in Babylon. Principle number 1, politics must never govern our hope. If politics is the main thing impacting our attitude to life, then it becomes our highest value, then it becomes our main hope, then it becomes an idol. We're more concerned about the political state of the nation than the spiritual state of the nation. We're more interested in making conservatives or having conservative neighbours than we are in seeing souls saved or reaching neighbours with the gospel. And we despair because politics is such a mess, because there is no hope in politics. It's not the kind of hope that cannot put us to shame, to use Romans 5:5 language. Psalm 146 says this, "Put not your trust in princes, in a son of man in whom there is no salvation. When his breath departs, he returns to the earth. On that very day his plans perish. Blessed is he whose help is the God of Jacob, whose hope is the Lord his God, who made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, who keeps faith forever." Principle number 2, we must have a realistic view of what can be achieved in politics. The overwhelming emphasis of Scripture is not that we are in control of who governs us. Actually, few things are clearer in Scripture than this. God sets up kings and removes kings. Governing authorities exist at God's own discretion, and He is the main person responsible for their rise and for their fall. Now, God's sovereignty is never a reason for us to be irresponsible. The right conclusion to that truth is not to say, oh well, I will never vote, because that's irresponsible. The right conclusion to that information is to accept what we can do and do it, and accept that the final outcome, whatever it is God's, and His ultimate purpose will come to pass despite it. Quoting from Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 4, "Blessed is the name of God forever and ever, to whom belong wisdom and might. He changes times and seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, and He does according to His will among the host of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay His hand or say to Him, 'What have you done?'" Principle number 3. We must always remember that God often bypasses man's power structures. The coming of Christ into the world is perhaps the greatest example of this. God explicitly rejected the way of man, politics, power, institutions, might, and grandeur. The angel flew straight past the world's palaces, the world's armies, the world's rulers, the wealthy neighborhoods, the influential people, to an unknown peasant girl in the lowliest of circumstances, in the most infamous of places. God prefers, usually, to use the weak things of this world to shame the strong, and the foolish things of this world to shame the wise. And whilst we instinctively look to power to see God's work, and we instinctively want to grab the levers of power to do God's will, He rarely works in that way. He uses little old you and me, and even sillier things than that. From 1 Corinthians 1, "The foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. For consider your calling, brothers. Not many of you are wise according to worldly standards. Not many were powerful. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God. Let the one who boasts, boast in the Lord." Principle number 4. The only ultimate reason to be in politics is for the cause of the gospel. Actually, you could replace politics with whatever sector you're in, whatever life situation you're in. The highest value must always be the gospel. The point of being in politics is not ultimately politics. If you believe that, then you will compromise, you will hide your faith, and you will sin for the sake of power and influence, because politics and power are your highest value. And that would be disobedience to the command of Jesus, who told us to ensure that we never hide our light under a basket. The ultimate point of any Christian life, wherever it may be lived out, is the testimony of Jesus and the gospel that enlivens it. Jesus said that our good works in the world, our salt and our light, must be to this end, that men may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. In other words, they should see right through us to the real reason we're doing what we're doing, which is God and His gospel in Jesus Christ. And that's very sobering, for every political operative who hides their faith in order to seek influence, because they are sinning against this. They need to be like Daniel, hide nothing and let God take care of the rest. And principle number 5, and finally, governing authority is part of God's will for this world. So despite everything that I've said, God means governments to exist. The world needs authority structures. Anarchy is actually worse than bad authority in nearly every case. Romans 7:1 says, "Let every person be subject to governing authorities, for there's no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God." Government is an ordinance of God, which, on balance, is good for us. And some people are called into government. Romans 13 calls them servants of God, ministers of God, and that's something for them all to live up to. And some people get to live in a democracy, and they get opportunities to speak into politics as lay people. But we must engage with this institution, this government system that God has willed, always guided by the aforementioned principles. Politics must never govern our ultimate hope. We must be realistic about what can be achieved through politics, understand that God often bypasses man's power and glory, and we are only really in the public squares and in politics for the gospel, ultimately. And whatever happens politically, I know one thing, the true king will have his way in the end. I'm Martyn Iles, and that was an episode of Living in Babylon.